welcome back to the special business meeting for Tuesday, June 23rd. We adopted the agenda, but now there is a late amendment, which is to pull item 5.3, the letter of support for the Chamber of Commerce. And in fact, the Chamber has already submitted their application under the program with the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, so a letter of support is no longer required. So I will strike that from the agenda if there's a motion to amend the agenda to do that. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so now we're back to item 4A1. First three readings of District of Squamish Revenue Anticipation Borrowing Bylaw number 2763/2020. Hand that over to our CFO, I believe.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi there. So we're just looking for the first three readings of the Revenue Anticipation Borrowing Bylaw. There is an error in the bylaw number, so that just needs to be reviewed and then adopted again.
Right, so we dealt with this at our last special meeting, but it had the wrong bylaw number on it, Council, so we're just have updated that. So it's like a redo. So if someone would like to move first three readings, moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor French. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Then we have District of Squamish Fees and Charges Bylaw, Amendment Bylaw number 2764/2020. Ms. Goldbeck, are you there to speak to this?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. And I'm on video. Fantastic. Everything worked. Yeah, so this is further to our conversation last week with respect to the campground fees. So we needed to do a bylaw amendment to enable a change in the fee for accommodating financial hardship. So the intention is to set the fees at 50% of the regular rate. That is in alignment with our Recreation Access Pass, our low-income access program. And we set a maximum amount in alignment with my delegated authority for spending. I don't expect that we are going to get near that target, but just in the interest of having a cap, that's what it's been set at, and the rest of the fees and charges with respect to recreation have remained the same.
Questions, Council? Councillor Pango.
Just for clarity and to make sure we're approving the right thing, I think there was a typo which I believe has been resent to us, just changing trail to trial, and just to be sure we're approving the right thing so that we don't have to come and reapprove it.
Thank you for that.
Ms. Goldbeck, when we updated our procedure bylaw to deal with the pandemic, we provided specific powers related to health, environmental, or natural disaster emergencies. And I'm wondering why we're not using that language here this move is in response to the pandemic, but the update seems very general in nature. So
yeah. So through the chair, it is the intensity of the situation with regard to campers in urban areas has certainly been exacerbated by the pandemic. Some of the folks who are living in vehicles and who we hope will join the under this campground program have not necessarily been affected by the pandemic. Their situation predates the pandemic, so we wanted to keep it broad as to not exclude those people. But the urgency comes from the lack of sanitation, camping outside of designated campgrounds, which is a pandemic condition.
So is this amendment related to the letter we got from Dr. Henry, or is this a general amendment?
The letter from Dr. Henry was the burning platform to deal with a situation that already was an issue. I mean, the lack of sanitation with the concentration of campers is a public health issue, regardless of a pandemic. It's a public health issue and all kinds of other infection transmissions. I would say the letter from Dr. Henry was the push and the call to action to enact this situation.
And so how are we determining financial hardship?
The criteria for eligibility will be aligned with the Low Income Access Program, the Recreation Access Pass, which is defined in policy as a maximum household income or receipt of income assistance, and we're proposing to add recipients of the CERB benefit to that list as well.
So given we have an item on the agenda this afternoon coming up that speaks to not using the campground as a campground, wouldn't we want to limit the circumstances for this to emergency situations? Because how does this align with what we're going to be talking about coming up?
With the Brennan Park Master Plan, that's going to be the natural sunset of this model, is the changes being implemented through the Brennan Park Master Plan. We also, as Council is aware, we have a concurrent piece of policy work taking place for policy alternatives and options that will be some recommendations to the district for more sustainable models for people who are living in their vehicles. And so this is really an interim short-term measure. As that work goes on, and in the fall we'll bring some recommendations that are more sustainable and don't involve the municipal campground, because as you suggested, it will be used for other things in accordance with the Brennan Park Master Plan. Any other questions, Council? Councillor Stoner.
I think just picking up on that point, would it make sense to add some language to Clause 7B that at the discretion of the Director of Recreation, special review in the circumstances of a health environment or other natural disaster circumstance, special reduced rates may be implemented? I think that's the piece that's missing here, that we are talking about this in the context of, we understand the context, but if I go and read the amendment in 2 weeks, there isn't that context given in the amended bylaw.
Yes, I think that is a fantastic idea.
Did the minute taker catch that? Okay. So you'll have to repeat it if you move that motion, Councillor Stoner. Any other questions? Councillor Herford?
Thank you. While we're on the subject of the vehicle dwellers, van life, and so on, I'm curious about throughout the community during this pandemic, if we could have a little maybe an update of where we think these people will be moving from, like where are the hot spots, has there been, and as it relates to our camping bylaw and so on. And then maybe just a little more context for us all.
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, this is certainly a risk that we identified in implementation of the camping bylaw with schedules of enforcement. As we talked about last week, the schedule to the camping bylaw only allows us to enforce it in particular areas that were hotspots for environmental sensitivity and where we were seeing congregations of larger groups. And we knew that what might happen is that might just move people around town. And surely that is what has taken place. The hotspots currently are Pioneer, and 7th Avenue is also becoming a denser congregation, as well as some other smaller pockets around town. What staff think the solution is to extend the camping bylaw to the entire district boundaries, and that will give us the ability through bylaw to more effectively direct people to designated campgrounds, including this option, which we're making available for people. The traffic bylaw, which is a tool we have also, is challenging to enforce, and is also not good community relations to be knocking on windows in the middle of the night to be able to enforce based on people sleeping in their vehicles. It's not ideal. It's not respectful. So it's not the way we'd like to proceed. We'd rather do this in the day in a way that honors the dignity of folks living in their vehicles and be able to do that in a good way.
Thanks. All right, I don't see any further questions. Councillor Stoner, do you want to put forward your motion?
I will move the first three readings of the bylaw with an amendment to clause 7B so that it reads, at the discretion of the Director of Recreation, in the event of an emergency related to health, safety, or the environment, special reduced rates may be implemented on a short-term basis for promotional or trial purposes.
Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Race. He's in the room with me. It's very novel. I can actually see his hand. Any further comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Golbeck.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. With the revenue anticipation borrowing bylaw, we do have the ability under the ministerial order to adopt this type of financial bylaw on the same day. And so this would be the adoption of the bylaw we just gave 3 readings to. Moved by Councillor Stoner, second by Councillor French. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, and then we'll finish off with the Brennan Park. Oh, we won't finish off. There's 2 more items. The Brennan Park Fields and Lands Master Plan is up next. And Mr. Hoskin, since we are running a little bit behind, I'm hoping that you can be brief in your presentation and leave council time for questions.
Of course. Thank you. My apologies. Is the presentation up? I'm right. Okay.
You are on live. And Mr. Hoskin's presentation is now up. So I think we'll get back to our Brennan Park Master Plan update. We'll talk about air conditioning later.
Thank you, Chair and Committee. My name is Tim Hoskin, Director of Special Projects and Initiatives, and I'm here this morning to present to you the Brennan Park Master Plan update. And this is regarding the fields and surrounding lands surrounding the recreation center. First of all, I want to acknowledge that the Brennan Park is part of the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. And the Fields and Lands Master Plan will hold space for partnerships and opportunities with the Squamish Nation. Quick background, Brennan Park was made possible by our incredible volunteers. We created a vision and values through the Recreate Brennan Park that occurred in late 2018. In addition, an expression of interest was advertised to see what level of interest there was from private or public partnerships. We did receive a few that are part of the conversation today. The real estate and facility strategy was completed in mid-2019, and this provided some overarching direction to staff and our community around prioritizing infrastructure in the context of the whole community, not just recreation. We also conducted an audit around field usage to make sure there was understanding from both staff and the community on how much our fields are actually used and how close are we to maximizing the utilization of the fields. The Brennan Park Fields and Lands Master Plan started the engagement in late 2019, and we completed our stakeholder meetings in March of this year. Why are we doing this? Well, Brennan Park is the center of our community, and we need some guidance to accommodate a range of community activities and needs over time. So the vision. This has been seen by council and our community for a couple of years now, and came as part of the Recreate Brennan Park. Values. Values, again, part of the Recreate Brennan Park. Some key aspects. I won't read this to council and community, but some key values we need to be aware of is maintaining affordable programs and services, ensure that our facilities and programs are inclusive and accessible, and that we must drive our Squamish being a healthy community and drive for the health of our citizens. And that all of our facilities should be shared use to make sure we're maximizing the value of each of the facilities, and of course the consideration of the natural environment. As part of the process, we wanted to be very transparent with our community and stakeholders around constraints. We are limited by a few of them, and one of the key ones is floodway management. So we do have a flood management bylaw, which states that buildings built within the floodplain must be built to withstand a potential flood. We also need to maintain the integrity of the critical floodway. That's from the development permit area 2, and making sure that essentially water can get from Ramquam River back to the blind channel if there's a flood and water sitting in that area as a place to go. So through speaking with consultants, staff, and community, the proposed solution was creating zones. And in these zones, in Zone A, permanent buildings could be built. Zone B, only small structures and structures that allow water passing through them, i.e. on stilts, could be built in this area. And Zone C, the same as Zone B, but there's a higher environmental considerations. Here you can see a map of those zones. Zone A, I'm hoping my mouse comes up. Here is the area where essentially buildings should go. Zone B, allowing water to pass through. This is where only small buildings would be allowed, and facilities that wouldn't obstruct the waterway. In essence, we're trying to avoid building a dam from the top of the page to the bottom of the page that would restrict the water's movement. In Zone C, the natural environment with all the trees and wetlands. Other constraints. Well, there's the reality around our fiscal reality really is that many of our district facilities are at end of life. And through the Real Estate and Facilities Master Plan, we identified that our core facilities need to be prioritized for renewal. Some examples of these are the fire hall, which is already in process to be built, and operations center and other critical infrastructure that our community needs to continue to run. Other pieces around that are creating some alternative funding was recommended in the Real Estate and Master Plan. This includes sponsorship, private and public partnerships, grants, fundraising, and finding different ways to fund recreation infrastructure. Another key piece is that the district will optimize facilities before expansion. Example of this is before building another field, we would put lights on it, or we would, through an allocation policy, make sure that it's being allocated fairly and equitably and maximizing usage before we would add an additional field. Constraints. So there's also a sponsored Crown grant. The ownership of Brennan Park land, the history is Brennan Park was given to the district by the provincial government with the caveat that it must continue to be used for recreation-based, and that essentially it needs to be nonprofit use or have an offsetting social value. So what did we learn along the way? Here is the field user audit I mentioned earlier, and the usage of the fields. Some areas have seen growth, other areas have seen declining numbers. For example, soccer hit its peak in 2014 at approximately 800 users. In 2019, it was approximately 600 users. We've seen some minor increase in men's soccer, and rugby is now being played at Brennan Park. So what does this look like in actual numbers? Here is an example of the turf field. So this is our busiest field, and that's why we're showing it as an example. The actual capacity of the turf field peaks in the fall, but only hits a maximum of 67% usage. Here's the gravel field in comparison. Nobody uses the gravel field because it's not fun to play on, and grass or turf is much nicer. So huge capacity there. So what happens if we continue to grow, or we were to grow at approximately 5% growth? It would take approximately till 2045 to see a 50% increase in field usage, when we would really start having being cramped for space. Up till then, we would be able to address issues or capacity issues on the fields by, for example, first allocating better, second putting in a second turf field and lights, or in a track, and then putting lights on the grass field, and then only ultimately, once all of those pieces were done, would we look at creating new fields. So what we heard, fields and lands, there's been a lot of community engagement through recreation over the last 8 years. The most recent was the field use audit, as well as we did one-on-one stakeholder interviews with 20 different stakeholder groups, and that was to make sure everyone had the same level playing field, and that everyone understood the constraints, and we didn't just come forward with a wish list of everything that everyone wants that wasn't grounded in fiscal reality and vetted through the values and lens of community needs. We also did 2 stakeholder meetings in February and March that were extremely well attended. We had field user groups, events groups, leaseholders, Arts Council, Legacy Lands was there as well as the consideration. While here's a very nearby landowner that has the potential to handle some of the overflow from Brennan Park, Vancouver, Coast to Health, district staff, and invitations were sent to Squamish Nation in the school district. So community engagement, the first meeting was held at the 55 Activity Center. We had incredible participation. I think we had approximately 50 folks there representing 20, 25 different groups. And it was a lot of fun. We made a game of it. We created huge maps that were on the whole table. And then we challenged everyone that they must take game pieces of everything everyone had asked for and to put that on the map. So starting with the long-term pieces, they had to fit ultimately field expansion and various other pieces to make sure that they fit in the long-term goals, and then got into the medium goals, and then into the short-term goals. It was a really cool exercise that got everyone thinking long-term, as well as how do they get every single piece onto the map. And what was really cool is we left with considerable consensus that of all the tables, I think we have 5 or 6 different tables, the maps were very, very close in what they looked like. So we had a very high level of consensus coming from the group, and the stakeholders were amazing. Everyone was engaged. Everyone signed off on the vision and values and worked together to come up with their ideas and solutions. We then had the second stakeholder meeting with a focus on the Zone A, where they could put buildings. And again, came up with consensus. We just focused on those areas, but all the user groups that were interested to have that conversation attended, and between Brennan Park and Hendrickson Fields, got into more detailed conversation. So community engagement summary. What we heard is everyone was in agreement that sports, arts, culture, leisure, and events have immense social value. Everyone got that new facilities are expensive and there's not enough funding available to meet everyone's needs. Everyone also understood that operating additional facilities would be another expense, and stakeholders were very clear that they have a strong desire to be involved and influence the outcomes of programs and facilities at Brennan Park. There was also a strong desire for certainty over the land base. If we're asking community groups to fundraise, to build, enter potentially land use agreements to operate logger sports, or operate or fundraise for a clubhouse, or expand BMX, that they want to know that they can have that space for 20 years, 25 years, and that any investment into their infrastructure will be worthwhile. They also wanted clarity on how stakeholder organizations can progress, fundraise, and operate in greater collaboration with the US and other stakeholders. And this is an intent, a want to have the district, if we can't afford to build all the infrastructure is needed, that we provide some support to the stakeholder organizations to help them fundraise and make sure that they're not competing against each other, and to provide some guidance and expertise to them. Another key piece is stakeholders support the following: that we must maximize use of existing facilities, implement shared use of facilities, and are supportive of an alternative funding model. And that's where they would support fundraising, support finding other ways to pay for infrastructure. So getting into the long-term goals, maybe I'll bring up the map here. So in the long-term goals, this is 2015, 20, 25 years, potentially more, would be in Zone A, the current Sorka bike park would be reserved for some potential expansion of the recreation center, or potentially parking, but really acknowledging that the Zone A may need to be filled with buildings, and that land held in reserve for 20, 25 years to meet those expansion needs. In Zone B here is to upgrade Brennan Park fields with lights, upgrade Brennan Park, upgrade the fields, but also put lights on them. They do require, say, quite a replacement, but a near replacement to meet long-term needs. The expansion of fields, ultimately, that we're to the north, to the west, and on the existing equestrian outdoor ring would be held in reserve, ultimately, for expanding sports fields in this direction. I'll explain a little bit around the dashed lines, and this is through conversations with staff, and we haven't yet clearly identified the extent of the Zone C and the riparian values, the environmental values. In short, what we think is that this zone here, there are some waterways, but they're truncated as they go north, and they could potentially be rerouted primarily into this zone here, which would create space for expansion of Hendrickson Fields. So it is thought that the northern half of Hendrickson Fields is quite doable. However, there is concern and would require quite a bit more consultation, investigation on the wetlands habitat riparian area to the south, if that's possible to cloverleaf without major expense or changing the waterways. So medium-term goals, there's a lot in here. So I will touch on the list first before we get into the map. An idea did come up about road realignment, and I'll come back to that when we see the map. And what that is there opportunity to reimagine the off-ramp from the highway and the roundabout and the driveways into Brennan Park to create more of a consistent green space and creating more opportunity for recreation infrastructure, from buildings to playground areas to shaded areas for community gathering. Active transportation is trails, looking for opportunities to connect Brennan Park to the trail system to the west, potentially from a Walmart to the fields. The courts, creating pickleball, tennis, basketball, lacrosse courts, having those built and available. The idea of a bike hub, an indoor bike park, a BMX park, which is already in existence, a bike skills park, that's the SORCA, and the skate park, all staying where they are. Fields to replace the gravel field with turf, putting a running track around that for special events in the loggers sports events area, an outdoor theater, moving camping to an event camping space. We're just north and west of the current equestrian area, and creating picnics and playgrounds as we can and as needed. There is a couple of acronyms of PG and CW, which stand for playgrounds and change rooms, washrooms. Equestrian has a bubble that we haven't been able to put up yet, and to put that up in sharing with logger sports, that would be used as a multi-sport space that could be used by logger sports for their training as well as for the equestrian. Outdoor space and trails, and that would be the reason it's there, as well as for the equestrian, but also the ability to tie that into a graded trail system. So the map gets more complicated as we add the medium term pieces in. So starting at the north, the rerouting of the road, and again, this is outside of necessarily the district's decision making with the highway, and would take cooperation with highways, but to reroute the off-ramp so that it would then tie in north of the tennis courts, northwest of the tennis courts, and ultimately get rid of that road, which could then become green space. Then you could turn in directly into the parking lot here off of the highway and eliminate the other road off of Brennan Park here, the driveway. So essentially that would create green space from Brennan Park to the road here. Pickleball courts, tennis courts beside the existing tennis courts, playground expansion at the current parks office and change rooms, replace the gravel field with turf, create event camping at the equestrian. It forms a bit of an L here.
Mr. Hoskin, we're starting to run short on time, and I know council's read their agenda, so if they have any questions about the map, they can ask, but I wonder if we could just get through your slides. That would be helpful.
Thanks for the nudge. So short-term goals, again, there's a list. I'll skip going through them. And then fitting those in, the map gets a little bit more complicated, but the stakeholders were able to squeeze everything in with consensus. So land use agreement, fields and lands process, in summary, it's creating a due diligence process, demonstrating that any land use agreement demonstrates an alignment with the vision and values, that it is, if it is private, that they pay market rates. If it's public, it's $1 rates, but all must demonstrate the social value to the community. They all must demonstrate their sustainability, their fiscal sustainability, and demonstration of their strength of their membership or board. Fields lands agreements process. So once those proposals are received, they would be reviewed and key performance indicators to make sure we're thinking beyond the 1 year. We're thinking for multi-year, that there's benchmarks in place to keep everyone in alignment. And then a recommendation to council and council decision if they're for or against the long-term land use agreement. Land use agreements, if it's private business, there are two that came out of the expression for interest process. These private businesses have been involved as stakeholders and have heard the community feedback around their proposals. One is for an indoor field, a bubble, and the other is for an indoor bike park, another bubble. For land use agreements, nonprofit, an adaptive sports group is asked to put up some infrastructure to enter an agreement with the district, and they would provide sporting equipment from bikes to hiking chairs to different equipment for those to be able to get out and about. Good news story. Sorka Bike Park, BMX Park, Logger Sports in events grounds. The consensus was that Logger Sports would look to condense their space and to open up the space for greater community access and create a very strong relationship with the Arts Council to run more events and have it more of an arts events feel to it as well. Equestrian, there is the opportunity to that they are pursuing to potentially move to the legacy lands. And the other piece they are looking at is to move or to build their bubble on the corner of the what is now the Logger Sports and Events grounds, and share that bubble with Logger Sports. The equestrian field, their ring would be condensed, however, would remain in place until soccer fields were built in about 20 years. However, the rest of the area there would become events parking and camping. So other points to note, the campground to accomplish putting in the private bubbles or the bubbles would need to move to the area near the equestrian. Other points of note is the legacy lands, the interest of equestrian to develop facilities there, and interest by Sorka to expand facilities into the legacy lands. Discussion and questions in the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Hoskin. Council. Councilor Pettingill.
Thank you. Just in the recommendation, it's that we endorse the key concepts of the Fields and Lands Plan. I'm just wondering where the line is, like which pieces are the key concepts that we are signing off on, and then where's the pieces where us and the community through us still has discretion in this?
A great question. Essentially the next steps would be, unless there's aspects that council doesn't like here, we would take this presentation, the key points in that, and bring to the community for comment. And from that, we would build the finalized Brennan Park Master Plan for council decision in hopefully September. So the key points are this presentation.
Any other questions? Councillor Anderson?
Thank you. In the short, medium, and long-term goals chart, there is under the short-term a parks office. Some time ago, in fact last year, the Between Ships Theatre Society wrote to council regarding their need for storage and rehearsal space, and they inquired regarding the downtown Old Fire Hall near Municipal Hall. And the response received by the society from staff was that that facility was under consideration for a, quote, parks maintenance facility. So my question, Mr. Hoskins, is what exactly is the parks office that you have outlined in the Brennan Parks plan? Are we speaking of two different facilities here? What exactly is needed as regards parks office and maintenance facility?
Good question. Thank you. So just for the background for those listening, so the current staff office, parks office, and the change rooms are definitely at end of life and has been identified in the real estate and facilities master plan to replace those. So part of the Brennan Park Fields and Lands master planning process was to identify areas where those could go. The two main areas, at least in the short term, are on the is to move it as far south of the parking lot as possible, and to incorporate the change rooms as part of that. The reason for the movement is south is to get it as close as possible and as centralized as possible to the turf fields and the second turf field that will ultimately happen. It can remain in the same place, but one of the key decision-making pieces on this is utilities. If change rooms are placed too far away from loggers' lane, it gets extremely cost prohibitive.
So, Mr. Hoskin, Mr. Buxton is on the line, and he can respond to the other part of the question about the fire hall, which is not really part of your plan, so I don't expect you to answer that one.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Buxton, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
You missed all of that really interesting stuff I just said. Yes, the downtown proposal is sort of a longer-term play when we get the oceanfront and the waterfront parks. When those are constructed, we are going to need a parks maintenance facility downtown to maintain those parks. So that's a bit of a longer-term play, but reserving it for that in the medium to short term.
Thank you. I have a second question.
Please go ahead.
Yes. In your report to council, Mr. Hoskins, you refer under the policy section to the 2012 Parks and Recreation Master Plan. I'm just going to quote one of the recommendations from that plan. Engage artists and integrate public art into municipal building projects, public works, and parks infrastructure. My question to you is it timely or relevant to highlight this recommendation in the current master plan for the Brennan Parks area? It really refers to public art and consideration of design elements as we plan these facilities. Is it too soon, or is it already relevant to mention this as a recommendation or a plan?
It's a great point, and I would guess it's a given. Arts is extremely important and is a value philosophy embedded throughout what we do. The Arts Council was a strong advocate and a strong part of the stakeholder engagement, and I would expect that whatever we do or build would have that lens on it.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, I want to confirm, so the proposal here is that for the camping area, it would be moved to a different location and it would no longer be a regularly accessible campground, it would be events-only camping, correct?
Correct.
And I'm just wondering if staff can speak a little bit more to that decision. It seems like in the stakeholder engagement, there wasn't any representation from the Squamish Vehicle Residents Association, and I definitely have concerns about moving that really valuable municipal asset as it currently stands to something that becomes less permanent and replaced by a for-profit or leased land space.
Thank you, Councillor Stoner. It is a good point around consideration of maintaining accessible camping. My understanding is through community services, through Ms. Goldbeck, we are developing a policy to ensure those that need the financial support, those living in vehicles, vans, will maintain that. This group was not part of the consultation process. This did focus on the Brennan Park and the initial stakeholders. It could be flushed out from community comments as part of the next stage, going to the broader community. The intent was that with the campground occupying some of the Zone A that is suitable for building development, and the potential for conflict as the area grows with more and more residents and greater use, that the placement of the campground might be better suited away from the main road and residents.
Does that answer your question,
Yeah,
Councillor Stoner?
Yeah, thank you. I have one other question.
Go ahead.
I'm just curious, we know that search and rescue is looking for a more permanent and or larger space. I'm just curious if they were involved in the conversation at all.
Not directly, no.
Any other questions? I have a question. We talk about one of the principles being able to sort of share space, that no one can actually have just their own space anymore. When you were doing the consultation, did user groups talk about the bubble for the indoor bike park? It's really just able to be used as an indoor bike park. And also would need visitor traffic more than local use. So I'm just curious about how does that fit in, or whether there were comments about that particular facility.
Yes, there was a wholesome discussion around the bubbles and private land use agreements. Both the bike and the field proposals, it was strongly felt by the stakeholders that it needed to be accessible to the community, and that the private businesses need to support local programs. So if that's partnerships with recreation services, delivering camps cost effectively, to renting to community groups, if it's training specifically for the bike park, that BMX would see great benefit from that for their athletes, that mountain bikers would see benefit, and local race groups like Team Squamish. So similar to the field, where it would be soccer, indoor field, where it would be soccer, potentially football, rugby, all wanting to get access and using the field. Local bike groups all see benefit from the bike park as well.
Another technical question. We've got 2 ball diamonds to the northern part of Area A. And does your capacity model include those, because I'm wondering if in the short term they move south and we did the expansion of Hendrickson Field, would that not free up more space on the northern side for an expansion of Brennan Park or courts or a lacrosse box or any number of things? By accelerating that move, we consolidate softball in one area.
There were, we spent one afternoon and one morning looking at a whole bunch of different really cool what ifs. It is, that one certainly came up, and the idea that creating green space or freeing up that Zone A space for additional facilities, where they landed was that this, with the current projected need and the current want list or needs list, it's not needed at this point. But if there was a facility essentially that potentially could be moved, that would be one. It's also was built by volunteers and a lot of passion there, and it was touched upon. The other side of it is a lot of community effort went into building that field. Don't make any big changes like that lightly, and make sure there's lots of consultation.
Any other questions? Councillor Herford and Councillor Pettengill.
Thank you. The road alignment concept is interesting to me, but I'm just wondering, is that as far along as we are in that process? Is the sketch? Okay. There's a lot of pieces there, and as we know, there's development across the road, and I think that area could use some improvement, and I think we're on the path to improving that with some of the addition of the roundabout or whatever that intersection improvements look like. But that concept, I think, is worthy of some more work. But there's, I'm willing to bet it's going to take up a bit more land than we think it's going to free up there. But it is worth exploring. I'd like to go back to the campground portion, and we talked about capacity in regards to the fields and so on, and what has in its current state, what is the usage rate been at the campground?
It only fills up on long weekends, and the rest of the time there's usually capacity, and certainly in non-prime hours or non-prime time during the week, essentially, it has low capacity. It is a similar trend of the rest of the campgrounds within Squamish and surrounding Squamish, that they're only hitting capacity on peak long weekends.
Thank you. Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah, just wondering if you can speak a little bit to how we balance private operator having exclusive access to public space. And I'm thinking, a family that maybe can't afford the typical $4,000, $6,000 mountain bike wants to ride in the indoor bike park. Would there be bikes available for them? Would we expect there to be sort of no charge for locals to go there and they just charge fees at night? Or like, what sort of operating parameters in general do you have in mind to kind of make sure that public spaces stay public?
Another good question. So I breezed over it fairly quickly because it was fairly in depth, but it is in the package. Is the process for vetting private proposals and public proposals if we're interested in long-term agreements. And a key aspect of that is to measure the social value, essentially. So if it's a private business, we are required to charge them market rate. and that market rate can either be used for social benefit to offset program costs, or it could be a social benefit to develop other recreation facilities, or it could be something completely different, such as that they would have to come up with. Here is our proposal. We are going to have an access plan, a financial access plan, that a kid that can't afford a bike, we will provide low-cost rentals, that sort of thing. So we would be asking them to create their plans or business proposal to justify the social value that would be reviewed by staff, make sure there's key performance indicators, that sort of thing, and then brought to council with the recommendation to move forward or not, and it would ultimately be council's decision.
Okay. So does someone want to put a motion on the floor, and then we'll move to comments? Councillor Race? Moving the staff recommendation, seconded by Councillor French. Do you want to speak to it?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hoskin. And I'm generally supportive of the direction this is going, and don't really have any issues at this point, with the exception of the privatization of some of the lands. And that does raise concerns for me. It would, from my understanding, would typically take long-term commitments to those operators, whoever they might be, for these bubbles. I don't have a problem with having bubbles there. It's more the private ownership part and the commitment and the long-term leasing and financing against it and so forth that might come with all of that causes me the concern. But that aside, I do generally support the direction this is going. I'm sure there'll be some more tweaking as we go along, and the Mayor mentioned one possibility. But at this point, happy to see this go forward. Thank you.
Other comments? Go ahead, Councillor French, and then Anderson and Pettingill.
Yeah, so first of all, I would like to acknowledge the great work that staff has put into this effort. It's been a big project, a long project, and in these last couple of weeks, particularly challenging with the pandemic. So, Mr. Hoskins, to you and Ms. Goldbeck and the entire team, thank you very much for this comprehensive report and the work that you've put into it in challenging times. As Councillor Race suggested his concern around the private land holdings, I'm aligned with that concern. And above and beyond that, this looks like a great document to me, and exactly where we need to be as we look into the future for our recreation facilities. I'll be supporting the motion.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I will also be supporting the recommendation. I'm not only endorsing it, but I'm impressed by the whole exercise, the engagement strategy that has been pursued, and the results that have come out of it. I think it's a very impressive master plan work. I would like to offer or just comment that I really appreciate in the introduction to the report to council the reference to the fundraising and hard work of volunteers and community groups in the past to bring us the facilities that we have today. My father and John McCalchuk built the change rooms that are still there. That was in the early 70s. I remember, all of us remember who are around, the fundraising campaigns, the big thermometer on Cleveland Avenue downtown for the ice arena. A lot of hard work and many, many people and organizations involved. There wasn't anybody who wasn't in this town. And I've noted over the years, visiting consultants and planners from the city have come, and when they find out about this story, they're quite impressed and taken back at times. Many of us remember the rock picking in the fields, perhaps Councillor French, I certainly do. So I really appreciate that, and I think that's very important. Secondly, I wish to comment that the master plan refers throughout to the real estate and facilities master plan. This master plan, or that one, addresses not only recreational facilities, but also arts, cultural, and heritage facilities, among other community infrastructure items. I hope we can take care that the arts, cultural, and heritage facilities don't fall through the cracks. I have mentioned one example already here this morning, in the performing arts area, the theater storage and rehearsal space issue. Another example is the community archives facility. In the discussion of these items in the real estate facilities master plan, the same strategies and funding scenarios are cited as what you have cited in the Brennan Park master plan. So I believe that there is some liaison and taking care that needs to happen so that we ensure that we have a clear map and that some of these items aren't going to fall through the cracks, because cultural facilities have been discussed from day one at Brennan Park, after all. I'll leave my remarks at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Pettengill, Councillor Pettengill.
Thank you. And I would like to echo the appreciation for all the work that has gone into this, and just have some comments to add. I will be supporting this on the understanding that it will go out to the community, and we will see a final draft in the final plan. A couple things. I am hesitant about giving up that camping space. I think not knowing the full sort of supporting plans around people who are challenged with housing is important. And I think where housing is and where places to possibly camp is really important. And access to Brennan Park facilities is important. So I would, I guess, like to see the more holistic plan before I'm fully comfortable with giving up the camping piece. Share Councillor Race's concerns about the privatization. I don't necessarily want to rule it out, but I think ensuring that public access as the top priority, and the plan does speak to that, but also making sure, I think there's value in having spaces where we're not bombarded by more advertising and sales is important. And something we need to be keeping in mind. Another thought I had reading through this is, as we're evaluating this, just paying attention to the diversity of participants served. We have some advocacy groups for different sports and activities that are very vocal and strong and well-resourced, and others aren't so much. And so I hope somehow we can, as we move forward, we are considering that balance. Just two other things. I just want to make sure that with Squamish Nation, I know we've been eager to engage and work with the nation. Just trying to myself remain conscious that they have 22 municipalities that are wanting to work with them, and sometimes it's not enough for us to just invite them to the table. We maybe need to do more, and I think our staff is actively trying to do that. And just a reminder of my support that we kind of try and go that extra mile in making sure we're building partnerships there. The final thing I'll say is that I think what brought a lot of us here to Squamish is the recognition that we have, between our natural and community-built assets far and above already anywhere else, I would say, in the world. And I think, we can identify things that we see in other communities that we don't have here, but in aggregate, I think we are miles ahead of pretty much everywhere else. And so I see this as, it's great to strive, but this is almost the icing on the cake. Some of the work is here. And so I think that perspective for our community is important. And we shouldn't lose sight of the fortune we have in being here, having a staff and community that has built the rec that we already have and continue to work towards more. So thank you.
Councillor Stoner, we're eating into our lunch break, and then Councillor Herford, and we still have another item. Go ahead.
All right, thank you, through the Mayor. Appreciate the work that has been done. I will just state what I'm not supportive of. So I'm not supportive of losing campground space. I think that is a very valuable recreation asset for our community. We know we have a camping issue. And so if we're going to move it away from A to somewhere that is less permanent, I would like to see that become more permanent. So I'd like some washing facilities there, some garbage facilities there, to ensure that we always have somewhere where we can direct people within our municipal boundaries as to somewhere that they can camp that is not necessarily driven by for-profit entities and whatever it is that they're looking to charge. I think that is critical. I'm not hugely supportive of having private operators on the public lands, but I would like to learn more about what the potential financial risks of doing so. So I'm happy for staff to continue to explore. But what happens if those operators are not able to fulfill their contract duties partway through development of that facility or something of the sort? So I'm curious to see what our risk would be there. And then finally, I would just ask that we call out more specifically. I was happy to see that the Art Council participated as a stakeholder. But when I look at the map, it looks very physical recreation focused. There's some comments that there's potential to use the Logger Sports area as also an event space. And I know that the Wellness Center aims to create some arts programming space. But when I read through the draft, that really fell kind of to the wayside to me. So I think specifically calling out how this plan aims to broaden our programming through recreation beyond just physical recreation is really important as well. I'll leave my comments there. Thank you.
Councillor Herford?
Thank you, and I'll be brief. I'm mindful of time. Thank you so much for the work. It's an area that a lot of our community feels very passionate about, and to arrive at these consensus or near consensus spaces early on is great and gives me confidence going forward. I am looking forward to seeing what the community has to say about where we're at. The private ventures, I think, need to be executed in a mindful way, and I think we've already sort of hit on that point, and those arrangements will be under and understandably will be under a lot of scrutiny from council and from the public. So cautiously moving into that space is, I do think that it'll be hard to execute some of these things without those opportunities. So I would like to keep exploring those, but I'm a little cautious. I also think that the campground space and is an important asset, and I think it's something that we could be doing more of. I'm not tied to where it physically is. It can move, and maybe it can be blocked off for major events, or there's ways to manage it. But I haven't heard much about the active management or promotion of that asset that we have currently, and I do think that regardless of where it's positioned on these maps, I would like it to be leveraged to maximum potential that it can to serve the community. And as some of my fellow councillors mentioned earlier, I think that there is with our vehicle dwellers and so on, there's a need there, and how best to serve that. And also these recreational events do have a need, and if people coming for the tournaments in the summer need a place to be, and our various events. So I do think that we're underutilizing what's there is being underutilized, and perhaps a move in location, a new facility can help that, but I don't want to lose the capacity overall. All right, I said I'd be brief. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. We'll be supporting overall. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Herford. Councillor French, did I miss you? No, you're good? Okay. Overall, I think this is absolutely ready to go to the public and get further feedback. I think that the use of public land for private operators, I think the argument has to be quite compelling for the public good for me to buy into that. I don't think operating a campground is a core business of a municipality, so I'm not opposed to moving out of that. But my question remains is, well, when it's not being used for public events, what is it being used for? With that idea of each space has to have more than one function. What you said at the beginning. I have taken another look at the vision and values for the Brennan Park Field and Lands Master Plan, and I think number 2, the inclusion and accessibility, is primarily focused on people with varying physical abilities, but I'm not sure it's focused enough on making sure that the demographics of our community are represented in the sports being played and the facilities being accessed. So I think there's probably some wording that could expand the idea of inclusion there. That's important. Otherwise, I'll wait for public comments. Thanks. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Mr. Hoskin. So we're now into our lunch break, but we have one more item. This is for council's information. We don't make staffing decisions. That is up to staff, but this has been brought to our attention. So Mr. Picketts is on the line and can speak to it if council has any questions. Councillor Anderson.
My question for Mr. Picketts will be regarding the scope for the position and any work plan with respect to renewable natural gas, RNG. The targets for on the part of the province for renewable natural gas in our natural gas picture are very ambitious, and they are commented on in our community climate action plan as being ambitious. In the big picture, according to the provincial study on this, is going to be wood waste. Is really the only resource that can take us to where the province wants to go. So my question is whether the scope of the position and the work plan can take into account the proposed in 2017 integrated wood waste working group that is yet to be launched, but it is recommended, and the prospect now Whistler collaboration with Whistler is referenced, but also West Howe Sound. People that have looked at wood waste in the connection with RNG in this region have looked at West Howe Sound in combination with Squamish. So the question would be then, can the scope of this position involve liaison with West Howe Sound, and and whether the working group that might look at wood waste could involve this proposed position? I think that about covers it. I'll just also touch on inventory issues for wood waste in relation to RNG is an issue that there's a lot of advice out there on, and FortisBC has a lot of expertise on. I hope my question is clear then. It's regarding the scope, whether it can address these issues relating to wood waste and RNG.
And maybe, Mr. Picketts, before you answer that, you can speak to how staff are going to determine the priorities for the work plan and then proceed. Because I know there's 5 areas. It doesn't mean that you'll choose to build this plan around all of them or this work plan.
Sure. So if we go ahead, the work plan would be proposed by us and finalized in collaboration with representatives from the FortisBC SES program. So what we have started to do is identify areas of symbiosis where our climate, the CCAP and the Fortis highlights are really well aligned. And one of them is related to exploring natural gas projects, renewable natural gas projects. And the 2 that I've so far identified is renewable natural gas associated with wood waste and the plausibility of using recovered landfill gas from our landfill. It would be an opportunity to tap into networks of expertise that Fortis has. In response more specifically to Mr. Anderson's question, the Fortis has requested that we expand the scope of this individual to cover a more regional basis. So my strong sense is that this will be highly supported. One of the things that they have requested we do is to expand outreach into Whistler, for example. So given that the spirit of that request, a more regional discussion would be welcomed.
Councillor Herford.
Thank you. In the renewal of this position was pending satisfactory performance, and I was curious if you could speak to what the criteria for that performance would be, and who is involved in making that particular decision?
So based on my initial discussions with the group, my understanding is that it's just a mutual avenue outward if things are not proceeding. It would mostly be tied to the work plan. So if progress has been made toward what has been set out in the work plan, my understanding is that no position has ever not been renewed, but it is a kind of a safety mechanism if the person just is not delivering. But it would be benchmarked to the work plan. So what we set out to do, is there being progress toward it?
Go ahead, Councillor Urban.
Thank you. And then in your, you said that in some areas we've got alignment with our community climate action plan, so that we'll call that the district's goals and Fortis's goals with their plan. Do you feel, I'm concerned about pulling away from our other areas of concern that may not be Fortis's concern, and how that and how those things interplay. And I'm sure you can see what I'm talking about there. So do you mind speaking to that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and this is something that we've thought about quite a bit. And I think if we go ahead with this, the way that would be, recognizing that this person isn't the only person we have on the ground working toward our climate action goals. So highlighting the areas where we can make, in particular, things related to retrofits and energy conservation would be where we would put our energy for this person. And if there were other areas that did not have that symbiosis, then other people like myself and other staff members would pursue them. It is something we will have to manage carefully, and that's something that we'll have to be very upfront about with Fortis and in this work plan, that we're absolutely not shying away from certain other things in deference to this or implicit or explicit goals. So it would be something to be carefully navigated, absolutely. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Did you have another question?
I'm okay for right now.
Okay. Councillor Race and then Councillor Pettengill.
Thank you. And I realize this is not a council decision today, but I do want to make the comment, this does raise concerns with me, and it's not that it's Fortis, who I regard as a good corporate citizen, but I do have a concern about private interests funding a municipal employee in this fashion. I understand we all already do that with developers funding a planner for dealing with their development, which the district hires and supervises. But we are, among other things, we are a regulatory authority as a municipal government. And so here we're asked, the work plan must have synergies with Fortis priority areas, for example. There's a question about whether this would affect our decision on any other activities that Fortis has that continue on within the district. And I'm not suggesting they would, but we have to deal with this thing called reasonable apprehension of bias. It is the kind of thing that can disqualify councillors, for example, and cause us to declare conflicts. And so I question whether or not the public might have a reasonable apprehension of bias in future decisions regarding Fortis, separate from this, that might come before us. So, as I say, I wanted to make that comment. I realize it's not a council decision today, but I do have that concern.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Pettengill.
I wanted to put forward a resolution, if I might.
We'll just see if there's any other further questions or comments. I think I will make a comment that I share Councillor Race's concern. I think there's definitely benefits to having a staff person in place that is aligned, but there will be decisions going forward that will involve Fortis, and so we have to be cautious as a council about whether there will be that perception of bias. And, you know, maybe that doesn't differ too much from how developers fund staff people into the district. But I think it is something that we have to consider carefully in these types of decisions. And certainly if staff feel that they'd rather move more freely in terms of their priorities on the CCAP, we know that the 2021 budget is coming up, and this council has been very supportive of our climate action, and there's an opportunity there as well. Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah, thank you. So my resolution is resolved that council appreciates staff's pursuit of a senior energy specialist position funded by FortisBC to help ensure that Squamish achieves its target of community-wide emissions reductions from 2010 levels by 30% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. And if there's a seconder, I will speak to that.
Did you say 30%?
Sorry, 45% by 2030. Thank you.
Did you catch that?
I can reiterate or email that.
If you could just say it again, please, and then email it.
Okay. That council appreciates staff's pursuit of a senior energy specialist position funded by FortisBC to help ensure that Squamish achieves its target of community-wide emissions reductions from 2010 levels by 45% by 2030 and 100% by 2050.
Is there a seconder to the motion? Councillor Stoner is seconding.
So thank you. And so, you know, and I appreciate the comments of my colleagues. I think there is a reasonable apprehension of bias. I am trying to find a balance between something that I think people will be willing to support. I would personally like to go a bit further, but I've settled on this. You know, in an original ideation, I had a direction to mandate this be an outcome of the plan in relation to Fortis, so I've pulled that back just to re-articulate our IPCC goals as the district's overall goals. And the reason for that, beyond just, or speaking to the apprehension of bias, this report is coming to us with Fortis's explicit talking about their 30 by 30 reductions, which falls short of our targets. It also talks about their move into LNG as a means of climate action, and we have just sort of said that that's not sufficient for us without hitting the IPCC targets. And so I think if I'm in the public, you know, I'm seeing staff talking about accepting up to $260,000 along with, as part of a package where it sort of talks about commitments that are far below what we've said in our CCAP. And so I'd be wondering, well, so where is council? Does this mean they've actually stepped back a bit and they're willing to pull back? And so what I've tried to do here is not approve staff's decision, but just say that we appreciate it, and just for clarity's sake, reiterate that high-level goal in our community action plan. And I hope that finds some sort of balance, gives everyone that clarity of what the end goal is at the end of the day, and doesn't step on staff's toes.
Thank you, Councillor Pettengill. I'm going to speak. I'm not going to support this motion. I think it is vague. I think our climate action goals are already well enshrined in our community action plan. In fact, I think the wording of this motion sounds like an endorsement, and I heard reservation expressed by several of my colleagues, so I'm just going to let this one pass. I won't be supporting it. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, through the Mayor. And I did second this motion, and I am supportive of it in principle, but appreciate that this really isn't a decision to council in terms of a staffing component. So I recognize Councillor Pettengill's efforts to try and clarify some scope of what we would expect as council, but I am very cognizant of the other conversation around reasonable apprehension of doubt, and I think that any motion here that potentially signals support or pursuing of this position puts us even more into hot water with that reasonable apprehension of doubt. This is something that I think we have done on numerous other occasions, whether it's through developers. So I'm not overly concerned about staff pursuing it if they want to pursue it, but I think that their decision to do so should be their decision to do so. And as long as it falls in line with the other high-level policy directions that we've put in place as council, that is where our position is to support that. It's in the policy realm.
Are there any other speakers on this motion? I'll call the question. All those, Councillor Herford.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I think our community climate action plan speaks, and its unanimous endorsement from this council speaks volumes, and that is what we will be measuring outcomes from. So if staff, and I'm happy with staff's, and staff is aware of that, and I expect them to express that towards to Fortis should they choose to continue pursuing this, given the feedback today. So I don't think, although I appreciate the spirit of this motion, I think that we've already spoken quite loudly and articulated this with with an in-depth plan as well. So, and if staff feels that they can accomplish the pieces in that plan, then I would like to empower them to do that.
Thank you.
I won't be supporting this motion.
I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Race, Stoner, Herford, French, Anderson, Mayor Elliott oppose. Motion fails. Thank you, staff. Thank you, council. Motion to terminate. Oh yeah, we'll recess now.